I never thought I would sit down and put this into words. I never thought I would tell strangers on the internet what happened inside my own home. But I've come to understand that silence protects the wrong people, and my daughter, if she is watching this somewhere, deserves to know that her father finally found his voice. My name is Walter, and this is the story of how my granddaughter, a 9-year-old girl who never got the chance to know her grandmother's hands, reached into fire to save the last thing that proved she ever existed, and how that single act tore my family apart before it put us back together, stronger than we had any right to expect. It started on an ordinary Thursday in October. I remember because the maple in the front yard had just turned, and I'd spent the afternoon raking leaves into piles for my granddaughter to jump in when she got home from school. I was 68 years old, and some days my knees reminded me of every one of those years, but that afternoon I felt good. I felt like a grandfather is supposed to feel useful, needed, surrounded by the people I loved. The house had been mine and my late wife's for 31 years. Her name was Ruth, and she had been gone for 6 years now, taken by a stroke that gave us no warning and no goodbye. We had built this house together, plank by plank in some places, because in the early years we couldn't afford to hire it all out. Ruth had painted the kitchen herself, a soft yellow she said reminded her of her mother's farmhouse in Ohio. And in the front hallway, hanging in a wooden frame she had carved herself in a woodworking class she took the year our son was born, was a quilt. It wasn't just any quilt. Ruth had sewn it by hand over the course of 11 months while she was pregnant with our son, Michael, piecing together scraps of fabric from every important piece of clothing in our lives, a swatch from my army uniform, a piece of her wedding dress, fabric from the blanket her own mother had wrapped her in as a baby. She used to say that quilt held our whole family's heartbeat stitched into the thread. When she died, that quilt became the one thing in this house that felt like she had just stepped out of the room. My granddaughter, Nora, used to press her small hand flat against it and ask me to tell her the story of every patch. She never met her grandmother, A2, and A2A. Ruth died 2 years before Nora was born. But through that quilt, through my stories, Nora had built a grandmother inside her heart, piece by piece, the same way Ruth had built the quilt itself. My son Michael and his wife Vanessa had been living with me for the past year. Michael worked long hours as a regional manager for a trucking company, and after they lost their apartment in a rent hike they couldn't absorb, I told them my door was always open. Family helps family. That's what I believed. That's what Ruth would have wanted. Vanessa never wanted to move in. I understood that. Nobody wants to live under someone else's roof, follow someone else's rules, in someone else's house full of someone else's memories. But understanding didn't make it easier to live with. From the very first week, there was a tightness in the air whenever Vanessa walked through a room. She thought the house was cluttered with what she called old people things. She thought my routines were rigid. And more than anything, she resented that quilt hanging in the hallway, because every time she walked past it, she said, it felt like Ruth was still the woman running this household, and Vanessa was just a guest in her own home. That Thursday evening, Michael and Vanessa came home from a doctor's appointment. Vanessa was 7 months pregnant with their second child, and I could tell from the moment the car doors slammed shut in the driveway that something had gone wrong at the appointment, or maybe nothing had gone wrong at all, and she simply needed somewhere to put her fear. Some people turn inward when they're frightened. Vanessa turned outward, like a storm looking for something to knock down. This house is suffocating me, she announced, kicking off her shoes hard enough that one hit the baseboard. Michael, we cannot raise 2 kids in a place that still smells like your dead mother's potpourri. Vanessa, please, Michael said, and I could hear in his voice the exhaustion of a man who had said those 2 words 10,000 times and knew they had never once worked. Nora's right there. Nora was sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, and I saw her shoulders climb up toward her ears the way they always did when her mother's voice took on that particular edge. She was small for 9, with Ruth's same dark, serious eyes, and she had learned, the way children learn things they shouldn't have to, how to make herself quiet and small when a storm was coming. I stood up from my chair by the window. Vanessa, why don't we sit down, all of us, and talk about this? I don't want to talk, Walter. She said my name the way you'd flick something unpleasant off your sleeve. I want this house to stop being a shrine. I want to walk down my own hallway without that woman's quilt staring at me like I'm some kind of intruder. That quilt is Ruth's, I said, and I felt my own voice shake, not with anger yet, but with the effort of holding anger down. It's the only thing of hers that Nora has ever really known. Nora doesn't need a dead woman's blanket to know who she is. She has a mother. Me, right here, breathing. Vanessa's voice cracked upward, sharp and cutting. But nobody in this house seems to remember that. Michael rubbed both hands down his face. Vanessa, it's just a quilt. It's not hurting anyone hanging there. It's hurting me, she screamed, and the sound of it made Nora flinch so hard her pencil rolled off the table and clattered to the floor. Every single day I have to walk past it and be reminded that I will never be good enough in this house, because I'm not her. I will never be Saint Ruth. I stayed quiet. I had learned over the past year that engaging with Vanessa in this state only poured gasoline on something already burning. I looked over at Nora. Her face had gone the color of paper. She was watching her mother with the kind of frightened stillness you see in an animal that has learned exactly how far to run before it's too late. Vanessa turned on her heel, and I understood a half-second too late what she meant to do. She walked into the hallway, her footsteps hard and fast against the hardwood, and I heard the frame come off its hook before I even got out of my chair. "Vanessa, don't you dare," Michael said, following her, and there was real fear in his voice now, not just weariness. She carried the quilt into the living room, where I kept a wood stove burning against the October chill, and she opened the little iron door with the toe of her sock, and before either of us could cross the room to stop her, she shoved the quilt inside. The room went silent except for the sudden hungry crackle of the fire finding new fuel. No, the word tore out of me before I even understood I was moving. I lunged toward the stove, but Vanessa stepped in front of it, her arms crossed, her chin lifted like a woman daring someone to strike her. "It's just fabric, Walter," she said, and there was a coldness in her voice I will hear for the rest of my life. "It's time this family let go of the past." I watched through the little glass window of the stove as the fire began to eat the corner Ruth had cut from my old army jacket, the corner from her wedding dress, the tiny square of fabric from the blanket that had once wrapped her as a newborn in a farmhouse in Ohio. 31 years of marriage, 11 months of careful stitching, 6 years of grief folded into thread, all of it curling black at the edges. I don't know how long I stood frozen. It might have been 2 seconds. It might have been 10. The world had gone strangely silent, the way it does in the instant before something breaks forever. The first fine H. And then I heard Nora scream. It wasn't a child's ordinary cry. It was something older than that. Something that came from a place deeper than 9 years old should ever have to reach. "Grandma's quilt," she shrieked. And before Michael or I could even process what was happening, she was moving, faster than I have ever seen a small body move, straight toward the stove. "Nora, no," I shouted, but she was already there. She yanked the iron door open with her bare hand, and before Vanessa or Michael or I could catch her, she plunged both hands into the flames and grabbed hold of the burning fabric. The sound she made when the fire touched her skin is a sound I will carry to my grave. She wrenched her hands back out, the quilt, what was left of it, clutched between her small blistering fingers, most of it consumed, but one square surviving, scorched black at the edges, the little patch cut from Ruth's wedding dress. "Nora!" I finally got my legs working and crossed the room, my old knees screaming in protest, and I pulled her away from the stove and into my arms. Her hands were an angry, weeping red, already blistering across both palms. She was sobbing, but even through the sobs, even through the pain, her small fist stayed closed around that one surviving scrap of fabric like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had just come apart. Michael was beside us in an instant, his face a mask of horror, reaching for his daughter with shaking hands. And Vanessa stood exactly where she had been standing, her arms still crossed, and for one unbearable moment, her face showed nothing at all. Then she let out a short, irritated breath. "Oh my God, she's being dramatic. It's a burn, not a bullet wound. Kids are so theatrical." She said it the way you'd comment on a spilled glass of milk. That was the moment I watched something die in my son's eyes and something else be born there in its place. Michael didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply turned to his wife, his voice so quiet and so cold that it frightened me more than any scream could have. "Get out of my way. 82C. ... I'm taking my daughter to the hospital. He scooped Nora up, cradling her burned hands carefully against his chest. And he looked at me over her head. Dad, call 911. Tell them we're bringing in a 9-year-old with second-degree burns to both hands. I want paramedics meeting us if it's faster than driving. Go now. I had my old flip phone in my cardigan pocket, and my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it, but I got the call through. And the woman on the line was calm and clear and told me exactly what to say to Michael, exactly how to keep Nora's hands elevated and cool on the drive. Michael was already moving toward the garage, with Nora sobbing against his shoulder, and I heard him promise her, over and over, that she was safe, that she was so brave, that Grandma would be so proud of her. That should have been the end of the worst of it. It was only the beginning. Vanessa turned to me the instant the garage door rattled shut behind them, and something in her face had changed completely. The irritation was gone. In its place was something sharper, something calculating, and underneath both of those, something that looked almost like fear. "This is your fault," she said, pointing a finger at me, her voice climbing. "If you hadn't kept that ridiculous shrine hanging in the hallway, none of this would have happened. My daughter is at the hospital because of you and your dead wife's blanket." "Vanessa," I said, trying to keep my voice level even as my whole body trembled with something between grief and rage. "Your daughter is at the hospital because you threw her grandmother's memory into a fire in front of her. Don't you dare talk to me like that in my own house." "This isn't your house," I said, and I regretted the moment it left my mouth, not because it wasn't true, but because of what it set loose in her. She crossed the room so fast I didn't have time to step back. She grabbed my arm with a grip far stronger than I expected from a woman 7 months pregnant, her nails digging through my shirt sleeve into the skin beneath, and she shoved me hard toward the hallway. My back struck the wall beside the empty space where the quilt used to hang, and the pain of it knocked the breath clean out of me. "You are not going to that hospital and telling them lies about me," she hissed, dragging me down the hall toward the small den at the back of the house, the room I used as storage since Ruth passed. "You're going to sit right here and think about what your precious memories cost this family." She shoved me through the door hard enough that I stumbled onto the old daybed inside, and before I could get my footing, the door slammed and I heard the old skeleton key turn in the lock, a lock I'd installed years ago to keep Nora from wandering into a room full of dusty boxes and forgotten furniture. I sat there in the dark for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, my arm throbbing where her nails had broken skin. Then I heard her voice through the door, muffled, but unmistakable. She was on the phone. "Mom, I need you to come over right now." A pause. "No, listen to me. Michael took Nora to the hospital, and he's going to say I did something wrong. I need you here before he gets back with his father." "Yes." "I have Walter locked in the back room. We need to figure out what we're going to say." My blood went cold. She was calling her mother, a woman named Diane who I had met perhaps a dozen times in the past year and who had never once looked me in the eye. Diane was a retired attorney's paralegal, sharp-tongued and calculating in a way that made even Vanessa seem soft by comparison. The two of them together were a force I did not want to face alone, locked in a room with no way out. I looked around the den in the dim light coming through the curtained window, boxes of Ruth's old sewing supplies, an ancient roll-top desk we'd used for household bills before everything went digital. And then I remembered in the bottom drawer of that desk, buried under old tax returns and a broken stapler, was an emergency phone Ruth had insisted I keep years ago after I'd had a minor health scare on a hunting trip. A cheap prepaid flip phone, meant only for calling 911 if I was ever stranded somewhere with no other option. My hands shook so badly I could barely pull the drawer open. I dug through old papers until my fingers closed around the small plastic case. I pressed the power button and held my breath. The screen flickered weakly to life. It had almost no charge, but it had enough. I didn't have Michael's number memorized in my head, it lived in my regular phone, sitting somewhere in the living room where Vanessa had shoved me past it. But I knew the hospital's main line because Ruth had made me memorize it years ago, back when her own mother was ill. I dialed with trembling fingers. "City Memorial Hospital, how can I direct your call?" "Please," I whispered, cupping my hand around the phone in my mouth. "My son Michael Reyes just brought in his daughter, Nora, with burns to her hands. I need to speak to him. It's an emergency. It's about his wife." I was put on hold for what felt like an hour but was probably 90 seconds. Then Michael's voice, tight with worry. Dad? What's going on? Are you okay? Son, listen to me carefully, I whispered. Vanessa locked me in the back den. She's called her mother. They're planning something. I heard her tell Diane they need to figure out what to say before you get back. Michael, I think they're going to try to blame this on me. There was a silence on the line so heavy I could feel it. She locked you in a room. Yes. Michael, please, don't hang up yet. Just stay on with me a minute. I want you to hear if you can. Dad, I'm calling the police the second we hang up. Nora is stable. They're wrapping her hands now. They say she'll heal, but she'll have scarring. I'm coming home. Don't hang up. Don't provoke her. Just wait for me. I pressed my ear to the door after the call. My old body curled uncomfortably against the wood. The dying phone clutched in my hand, its screen dimming with every passing minute. I could hear Vanessa's heels pacing the hallway, and then, 20 minutes later, I heard the front door open and a second voice join hers, sharp, clipped, unmistakably Diane's. You need to get ahead of this, Diane was saying. When Michael walks in, you tell him his father attacked you. You tell him Walter has been getting confused, forgetful, aggressive. Old men like him, juries love a sympathetic young mother over a senile old man every single time. And the house? Vanessa said. Michael needs to understand that if he wants to stay married to me, wants his children to have any stability, Walter needs to go into a facility. This house needs to be ours. And my stomach turned to ice. This had never just been about a quilt, or an argument, or even about Nora. This had been about the house the entire time, the house Ruth and I built with our own hands, sitting on 4 acres that had tripled in value since we bought it. 4 acres Vanessa and her mother had apparently been circling like vultures long before that quilt ever went into the fire. I stayed pressed against that door, my heart pounding, memorizing every word, praying the little phone still had enough charge to matter. Though I didn't dare try to record with it, I didn't even know if it could. All I had was my memory and my 2 ears. Then I heard tires on the gravel driveway. Not one car, several. Doors slamming in quick succession. Heavy footsteps on the porch, and then a hard knock that rattled the whole front of the house. Police opened the door. I heard Vanessa's voice shift instantly, softening into something practiced and sweet. Officers, thank God. My father-in-law, he's been having episodes. He can be aggressive. I had to lock him away for my own safety. I'm so sorry. Come in, come in. Footsteps came down the hallway toward the den. The lock turned. The door swung open, and I was blinking against a flashlight beam. 2 uniformed officers standing there. And behind them, Michael, his face carved from stone, and behind him, still handcuffed by nothing but her own performance, Vanessa, and beside her, Diane, both women wearing expressions of rehearsed concern that didn't reach their eyes. Sir, are you Walter Reyes? The older officer asked. Yes, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to be understood. My daughter-in-law locked me in that room after her mother arrived. I heard them planning to lie to you both, to say I attacked her, and to say they need to force me out of my own home so they can take the property. That's insane. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. Vanessa said quickly, but her voice had lost its softness, climbing into something closer to panic. Michael stepped past the officers and put both hands on my shoulders. Dad, are you hurt? End quote. I'm all right, son, I said, and then I looked past him, straight at the officer who seemed to be leading the 2 others. Officer, I don't have proof recorded. I'm an old man with an old phone and no fancy technology. But I know what I heard, word for word, and I will say every bit of it under oath if it comes to that. It was Michael who spoke next, and his voice was flat and certain in a way I had never heard from my son before. Officer, I want you to check my wife's phone. She called her mother the second I left for the hospital. There will be a call log, a timestamp. And I want you to know that I am not confused, and my father is not confused, and my daughter is at City Memorial right now with 2nd-degree burns on both hands because my wife threw her late grandmother's quilt into a wood stove in front of her. The officer's face changed. He turned to Vanessa, whose composure had begun visibly cracking, her eyes darting toward her mother. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside with me, he said. and something in his tone left no room for argument. What followed happened faster than I ever could have imagined justice moving. The call log on Vanessa's phone confirmed the timestamp of her call to Diane, made within minutes of Michael leaving for the hospital. The responding officers took statements from both Michael and me separately, and our accounts of the conversation overheard through the door matched closely enough, in the specific mention of the house and a facility and getting ahead of this, that it raised enough concern for further investigation. Vanessa and Diane were not arrested that night, but a report was filed, and within the week, following a follow-up interview and a caseworker's visit prompted by the burn injury to a minor, Vanessa was charged with unlawful imprisonment for locking me in that room and with child endangerment relating to the injury. Nora sustained the argument being that Vanessa's actions had directly and recklessly created the dangerous situation that led to a 9-year-old thrusting her hands into an open flame. Michael filed for divorce 2 days after Nora came home from the hospital, her small hands wrapped in gauze, a sling keeping them elevated against her chest. Vanessa fought it for a while, the way people fight when they're more afraid of losing than they are sorry for what they've done, but in the end, with the police report and the charges hanging over her, and with her own mother's advice having landed her in far more trouble than protection, she signed the papers. The trial for the endangerment charge came 5 months later. I sat in that courtroom every single day beside my son, and when it was my turn to testify, I told them exactly what I had heard through that door, exactly what I had seen a 9-year-old girl do with her own bare hands to save the last piece of a grandmother she never met. Vanessa received probation, mandatory parenting classes, and a restraining order that kept her from unsupervised contact with Nora for a full year pending review. It wasn't the prison sentence some might have wanted for her, but it was accountability, and for a family that had spent a year swallowing silence, accountability tasted like water after a long drought. Nora's hands healed slowly. The doctor said she was lucky. Lucky is a strange word to use about a child who put her hands in a fire, but I understood what they meant. The burns were severe but not deep enough to require skin grafts, and with time and physical therapy, she regained nearly full use of her fingers. What she could not regain, what she will carry for the rest of her life, are the scars themselves, pale, ropey lines across both palms that will never fully fade. The week she came home from her final round of bandage changes, I sat her down on the porch steps where the maple leaves were falling gold and red around us, and I finally told her the truth about that scrap of fabric she had saved, the one from Ruth's wedding dress. I told her about the day her grandmother wore that dress, about how nervous I'd been standing at the front of a small chapel in Ohio, about how Ruth had laughed so hard at my shaking hands that the minister had to ask us both to settle down before he could finish the vows. Nora held that little scorched square of fabric in her healing hands and asked me, the way she always used to, "Was she nice, Grandpa?" "She was the finest person I ever knew," I told her, "and she would be so proud of you. Not because you saved a piece of fabric, sweetheart, because you understood, better than any of the adults in that room that day, what was actually worth saving." I had a local seamstress, a kind woman named Inez who ran a shop 2 towns over, help me mount that single surviving square in a small shadow box, along with a photograph of Ruth in her wedding dress that I found tucked in an old album. It hangs in the hallway now, in the same spot the quilt once hung, and Nora touches the glass every time she walks past it, the way she used to trace the frame of that photograph in a story I once heard. Though this story, this house, this family, belongs only to us. Michael is a different man now than he was a year ago, quieter in some ways, but steadier. End quote. He tells me he spent so many months trying to keep a fragile peace that he forgot peace built on silence isn't peace at all, it's just quiet collapse waiting to happen. He doesn't make that mistake anymore. He speaks up now, for Nora, for himself, for the memory of a mother-in-law he never even had the chance to meet. As for the house, it is still standing on those same 4 acres, and it will stay in this family for as long as I have breath to defend it. And long after that, it will belong to Nora, and to the brother she now has, born 3 months after the divorce was finalized. A boy Michael named Samuel, after nobody in particular, just a name he and Nora chose together because they both liked the sound of it. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the wood stove is burning low and safe behind its iron door, Nora climbs into the chair beside mine and asks me to tell her about her grandmother again, even though she has heard every story 100 times. I tell her anyway. I tell her about the yellow kitchen and the 11 months of careful stitching, and the way Ruth used to laugh with her whole body, like joy was too big to keep contained inside her. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a family was losing someone you loved to death. I have learned since that there is something almost as painful, and in some ways more dangerous, losing someone to cruelty while they are still standing right in front of you, and staying silent because you're afraid of what speaking up might cost. It nearly cost me everything. It nearly cost my granddaughter the full use of her own 2 hands. But we did not lose. We built something new out of the ashes, the same patient way Ruth once built that quilt, one small piece at a time, until what was broken became whole again, and stronger for having been broken at all. I have my son back, steady and clear-eyed. I have my granddaughter, brave beyond her 9 years, with 2 small scars that I hope she will someday understand not as wounds but as proof of exactly how much love she was willing to carry even through fire.